trouble, it's not my fault. All this I also lose my friends, I lost my baby. That is looking crack only today. Want to change, he wanted us. So the cougar try more like to feel. I'd kill the grill, take your life in a second. The table drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned eating every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like this kid for money. Sorry I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep with it for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing is that now we're not friends of anything. Cause they gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They try by you every new skin of everything is confusing. You will be good but you will be more. You will be good but you will be more. You will be good but you will be more. Alone every day it is a praise of pleasure.
Good morning and welcome to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free. Today we're going to be going over Kahale Warring, tight end for the Houston Texans out of San Diego State, and the situation that he finds himself in on the Texans. At wide receiver, they've got DeAndre Nuke Hopkins, who is an absolute stud. Over the last 2 seasons, he's averaging 169 targets per year, 10.9 targets per game, 14 yards per route, slightly under 9 yards per target, 14 yards per touch with a 63% catch rate. If you take these averages out to 16 games, that's about 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns a year. He is the undisputed first look in that offense, and that is not changing until he retires. They've also got Will Fuller, who is entering his 4th season out of Notre Dame. He's a speed demon with multiple injuries and only played 7 games last year. He's never finished a season. He's averaging 6 targets per game over the last 3 years and overall 520 yards per year, but his 16-game pace would be 800 yards and 7 touchdowns. He averages a healthy 14.6 yards per route, 8.3 yards per target, but last year he was at 11.2, 14.2 yards per touch, and a 57% catch rate over the last 3 years, but again, last year he showed improvement with 71% catch percentage. He's very talented. He did show growth last year in the drops department, but he couldn't stay healthy for the 3rd year in a row, which is very concerning for him as a player, not for Kahale. Kiki Kuti was a rookie last year. He is a solid to great receiver, but he had serious injury issues last year with a hamstring and a bunch of other nagging injuries. He is a pretty slender receiver, but fast. He averaged 6.8 targets per game, 10 yards per route, 7 yards per target, and 9 yards per touch. His 16-game average would have been 760 yards and 3 touchdowns, but I do think that total could be higher if he can stay healthy for 16 games based on the way they were using him. He's fast, tough, got good hands, and is pretty much a gadget player with skill. All of the other receivers are Jags, except for maybe Vincent Smith. At tight end last year, the Texans had Ryan Griffin, who got arrested for punching his hotel window on draft night when the news of Kahale Warring was going to be on the Texans broke. So that's a good sign, in my opinion. Not for him, but for Kahale, that's a good sign. And Ryan Griffin is probably off of the team based on the reports. Last year, he averaged 3 targets per game with a 66% catch rate, and he is 28 years old and was originally a 6th-round pick. Jordan Thomas was their overall best tight end last year. He's 22 years old and was selected in the 6th round and is entering his 2nd season. He's big at 277 pounds, pretty slow, but he can catch. He averaged 1.7 targets per game, 11 yards per route, 8 yards per target, and 11 yards per touch with a 74% catch rate. He compiled 200 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns last year, but he had no game over 53 yards, and 3 of his touchdowns came in 2 weeks against bad defenses, the Dolphins and the Broncos. And for the Broncos, I say specifically against the tight end, they've had a problem guarding the tight end for 2 years in a row now, and then we don't pick any tight end cover guys in the draft, so I don't know if that's really going to change. Their 3rd-round pick last year is their 3rd tight end, who is 26 years old, and is Jordan Akins out of UCF. He has good long speed, decent hands, and averaged 1.6 targets per game, 13 yards per route, 9 yards per target, and 13 yards per touch with a 68% catch percentage in his rookie season. He compiled 225 yards with no touchdowns. He did not have a game with more than 40 yards, and he was outplayed by a 6th-rounder, and the Texans spent another 3rd-round pick on a tight tight end this year, which indicates that they either missed on their pick and they realize it, or they simply want a loaded tight end room, a la the Ravens. If you would have combined all of their totals, as a group, the tight ends got 95 targets, 61 catches, 745 yards with 4 touchdowns, which last year would have been in the low tight end 1 range for fantasy. At running back, the Texans have Lamar Miller, who got 35 targets and 25 catches for 163 yards last year. He's a solid yet unspectacular player with 6.5 yards per route and 4.7 yards per target and a 71% catch rate. He should lead the backfield again unless D'Onta Foreman recovers fully from his Achilles tear, which he's going to be almost 2 full years removed from by the time the season starts. Foreman had 14 yards per route and 10 yards per target as a rookie, but that was only on 8 targets. So that's not a very good sample size to judge. He is athletic enough and can catch, so much so that he could be a league winner if he is healthy, but he does have numerous documented injuries in college and the combine and then in his first year of the NFL. Him not being able to recover last season is also a big red flag for me. I know that running backs in particular have a tough time with Achilles tears, but I also know that there are seasoned NFL veterans who seem to come back from Achilles tears without problems. Another running back to keep in mind for the Texans, since they had Alfred Blue go to the Jaguars, is Karan Higdon out of Michigan, who's an undrafted free agent. He's similar to Lamar Miller in that he's solid yet unspectacular, but he did surprise me with 4.49 40 speed. I could see him being relevant if Foreman can't stay healthy because he can catch and has pretty good vision. In my running back tiers, he was in the same sort of area as Bruce Anderson, Darwin Thompson, Dexter Williams, and Raquel Armstead and Myles Gaskin. So if you like any of those guys, you should probably keep an eye on Karan Higdon. At quarterback, they've got Deshaun Watson, who threw for about 4,200 yards last year with 26 touchdowns and a 103 passer rating. He's an absolute stud. He plays with a schoolyard QB style, but he is intelligent about it. In college, he made Jordan Leggett into a 5th-round pick in 2017, and Leggett has 14 catches for 114 yards and 1 touchdown in the NFL, so that kind of speaks to how Watson has shown that he will and can use a tight end and elevate their production over their actual talent level. Deshaun can and will throw any route to any level of the field, but at times he's inaccurate. The Texans were somewhere between 13th to 17th in passing yards per game when you add or subtract their sack yards. They were 17th in passing touchdowns, 15th in total yards per game, 11th in points per game, and 6th to last in passing attempts per game. A big reason that they were 6th to last in passing attempts was due to their 32nd ranked pass protection. The line was also 5th to last in yards created for the running back, 9th to last in power, and they were in the bottom half of all other run metrics. The good news is that they added a 1st-round tackle in Titus Howard and a 2nd-round guard in Max Sharping via the draft, and I haven't scouted them, but just based on draft capital, that should improve all of their metrics, purely based on draft capital, not the film. At some point this summer, I will get into scouting all of those players as quickly as I can, because it does help. The offensive line is the single most underrated position group in all of football and is a key thing to determine whether production is sustainable over the course of the season. The overall offense was 18th in yards per drive, 14th in points per drive, 20th in time of possession per drive, and they were the 5th most run-heavy team with a 48.3% run play call rate. Now we go from their worst unit on the team to their best, their defense. They were 12th in the NFL in yards allowed per game, 4th in points per game, 3rd in rushing yards per game, but they were 5th to last in passing yards allowed per game. They finished with an 11-5 record, and they did lose corner Kareem Jackson in free agency to the Broncos, but they added Bradley Roby from the Broncos, who struggled heavily last year when asked to perform as a number 2 cornerback, but he had looked promising in the previous 2 years, so there is hope that he can still improve. They added a 2nd-round corner, Lonnie Johnson, a 5th-round defensive end, Charles Omenihu, who I love on film. I haven't specifically scouted him, but every game I saw against Texas, I saw number 90, and I liked what I saw. They also added a 6th-round corner in Xavier Crawford. Right now, their only proven good secondary player is 2nd-year safety Justin Reed. Their defensive line and pass rush is absolutely stacked, and their linebackers are above average. The Texans head coach is Bill O'Brien, going into his 6th year with the team. He's a good football mind. He seems pretty abrasive to me. Last year, their horrible pass defense and offensive line led him to a game manager style of offense to hide the defense by playing a time of possession game and also to protect Watson from too many sacks and an injury. That was a very smart strategy, and he earned my respect for properly analyzing his team's strengths and weaknesses and adjusting his play style and play calling instead of sticking to his offense. Way too many coaches have their system and refuse to admit that their players aren't capable of fitting within that system and can't adapt to the current reality. Them having an 11-5 record when they couldn't protect the quarterback or stop the pass is pretty impressive. Let's talk about their 3rd round tight end pick, Kahale Warring, out of San Diego State now. He was my pre-draft tight end 2, behind only Noah Fant. He was the tallest tight end I scouted at barely over 6'5", 252 pounds, 9.5-inch hands, and a 77-inch wingspan. He had the 5th lowest weight divided by height, but it was still in the average range. He had the lowest span divided by height, but was still a ratio of 1.0, so it's not like he's a T-Rex or anything. And he had the lowest hand divided by height, but they were still over 9 inches, so that's not a red flag for me either. He ran the 6th best 40 at 4.67 seconds, had the 3rd best vertical with 36.5 inches, 3rd best broad jump at 122 inches, the 5th best bench with 19 reps, but he did have the 3rd worst 3-cone drill at 7.21 seconds, but followed that up with a 4th best 20-yard shuttle at 4.25 seconds. I have talked before, if you haven't listened to the film note episodes, about how I think the 3-cone drill is a little bit overrated, and a lot of that has to do with how much you practice that drill instead of actually showing your change of direction and explosiveness, and like the 20-yard shuttle more for that, so the 4.25 in the shuttle is something I like to see. The good things that Kahale shows on film are side-to-side agility, hands catching. He has great block effort, form, and effectiveness. When he does block, he keeps his hands together and in the chest plate of the defender, on par with Hawk and Irv Smith. So they're both great blocking tight ends. Fant is super underrated as a blocker, and so is Warring. But Warring has much better form than Fant. The importance of keeping those hands in the chest plate are that you have more power and you can get away with more holding, and it just shows the consistency with which he does it, that he won't have a steep learning curve on blocking once he gets to the NFL. When he's lined up as a wide receiver, he does not load or take a false step. He shields the defender from the ball during his catch point. He has good speed, good stop-start ability, awareness, and football IQ. He can find the open spot in the zones, and during scramble drills, he knows exactly what to do. He's good on the 2nd level blocking, which Hawkinson really is not. He's a nice high hands catcher. He avoids rerouters on his release. He's a fluid athlete, can make diving catches, doesn't just show the stop-start ability with the ball in his hands, but he shows the stop-start ability throughout his routes. He understands route concepts, and he works the defender side to side on vertical routes without losing his momentum going vertical. He can block defensive linemen, not just linebackers and safeties. He's got great blocking IQ, but not on the level of Hawkinson. Hawkinson is a rare blocker, but we do not get fantasy points for great blocks, and I love Kahale's effort and desire to win the rep and the game. The bad things he does show are that he will lose his balance every once in a while. He rounds some routes. He needs to be slightly lower in some blocks. He needs to consistently deliver the blow more as a blocker and keep his head in front of the defender. This is a little nitpicky, but Hawkinson can do it, so I'm going to mention it. But Warring is not strong enough to base block, which means one-on-one, I'm the offensive lineman, you're the D lineman. I'm trying to move you 2 yards straight backwards. That's a base block. So he's not strong enough to base block effectively some defensive linemen. Not all, but some. He's laid off the ball once in a while, but I'd rather see him laid off the ball when he doesn't know the snap count than jump, and he does get overextended while blocking at times. If you can't tell, that's a lot more good things when it comes to fantasy production than bad things. And the bad things, honestly, I'm nitpicking for someone who's only played 4 years of football. He shows amazing instincts and technique for someone who's only been playing for that amount of time. So overall, Waring's got a young stud QB who has shown an affinity for increasing tight end production in college, a weak tight end depth chart in front of him, and I believe Waring will be a day one starter. But he's going to rotate in and out with the other tight ends until he becomes Watson's security blanket. The offensive line and secondary need to improve to allow more pass attempts, but at least they did show that was a focus in the draft, hitting offensive line early and often. The secondary is pretty up in the air on whether or not it's going to be better. Even with those weaknesses, the Texans were middle of the pack on offense while still being sixth to last in attempts per game. So if either of those numbers go up, I think there's going to be more production and targets to go around. But remember that Watson did throw for 4,200 yards last year already. I do think those attempts per game were artificially deflated because the situation of their team's strengths and weaknesses led to a change in how they had to attempt and win the game by running the ball more and preventing Watson from taking too many sacks. So if they can't improve those, I think you're going to see much more pass plays called as long as they can protect Watson. I think Kahale is going to be fantasy relevant by mid-season. I believe he's a future fantasy stud, and the only tight end I would take in this draft is Noah Fant over Kahale Waring. That includes Hawkinson, that includes Smith, that includes every other player. Tomorrow we'll be going over Dylan Mitchell, who was taken by the Minnesota Vikings, a wide receiver. There'll be no advice segment today because I have to do some recording for the Tier 1 wide receivers that's releasing on Friday. Just wanted to say thanks to my first patron, all of you guys listening, and everyone who has supported me, and honestly, even the haters. I love being doubted and then proving people wrong. In a lot of ways, that's what motivates me. So keep talking shit on Reddit. As always, you can support this podcast by going to Patreon, and if you have any questions or comments, hit me up on one of my social media platforms. The happy song of the day is Next Time, This Time by Jim Croce, and the football song of the day is Numb/Encore by Jay-Z and Linkin Park. Both of those links to the YouTube videos are in the episode description. You've been listening to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free.
So much trouble, it's not my fault. All this, I also lose my friends, I lost my baby. That is looking crack, only today want to change. He wanted us on a cougar to try more like to feel. I'd kill the grill, take your life in a second. The devil drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned. Eating every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like this kid for money. Sorry, I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep waiting for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing is that now we're not friends of anything. Go they gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They trip at you, I read your skin up, everything is confusing. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will